Let's continue the momentum. It's my pleasure to introduce someone who truly embodies the spirit of innovation and cybersecurity. As a visionary and engineer at heart, Sumedh Thakar has dedicated his career to making the world's digital journey safer. He joined Qualys 21 years ago. He's played a pivotal role in shaping the company into a leader in the cybersecurity industry. From his early days as a coder to his current role as president and CEO, Sumedh's passion for technology and security has never wavered. So join me in welcoming Sumedh Thakar. Sir.
All right. Great talk by Rachel. I did, however, feel like all the things that she talked about, it just sounded like my watch list on Netflix. All the various documentaries that we have. So we're super excited to be here. This is our second year hosting the Cyber Risk Conference here for the public sector. We had a really great conference a year ago. I think being back here, clearly, the atmosphere has changed a little bit. I think the weather is different outside. So this morning I looked up and the weather, and today it said that there was a 99% chance of efficiency if you attended this conference. So welcome to all of you. I think the good bad news, one of the good news that the thing that Rachel talked about was, despite the various attack vectors, could be the Russians, could be ransomware, could be whatever it is, they are still for the most part leveraging that same unpatched vulnerability, that RDP port, that misconfiguration. And so while their motivations might be different, the good news for us is really about figuring out what is it that is causing them to be able to get into the networks and cause the damage. And if we can get focused on making sure that we can address those, though that's going to help us protect from multiple different attack vectors. And so the question really becomes, well, what is it that is important that actually we should focus on and fix? And as we talked about earlier, I joined Qualys 21 years ago, and at that time, a gold star customer for us was somebody who could scan their entire network once a quarter, and then they gave the IT team 90 days to fix all the findings. And that was good enough back then. I think the environment has changed a little bit, I would say, after all these years. Today, we are scanning millions and millions of assets and billions of detections of vulnerabilities. And we have customers more recently where they're like, hey, Qualys agent is scanning every 4 hours. That seems a little bit slow. Could we go faster? And I'm just wondering, like, how fast are you fixing things? I mean, I can tell you every 4 hours, but that's like, you weigh yourself every 4 hours, but then you don't go to the gym. Okay, the outcome is going to be the same. And so how do you get from this big pile of findings that we have just because we have significantly more number of assets, more infrastructure? And as Rachel said, the motivation for compromise is moving online from brick and mortar. So there are just more motivation and more attacks that are coming. And so when you have such a plethora of findings, you just don't have the resources to be able to go and say, yeah, we're going to fix everything that comes our way. You just don't have the budget, and also it doesn't really make sense. And so that is why we want to talk about a new approach, because continuing in the way that we have, where we would scan every week or two, and then the scan reports are dumped somewhere on a hard drive somewhere, and then somebody goes and triages those manually, and then we fix them, try to fix anything and everything that comes our way. That approach is not leading to success, and I think it's fair to say that continuing that approach is just not, in the future, continuing that approach is just not going to be tenable for us. So I'm going to talk about how do we move to a new approach, and that's where the title here talks about ASM to RSM. I think you're familiar with ASM, which is attack surface management. I think this is a term that everybody focuses on. However, I think given the volume of findings that we have, anything that is attackable or everything that is attackable may not actually cause you a risk of some sort of a damage or compromise. Just because you have a couple of windows open, if they're getting into a room where the room has nothing to steal, that particular thing is not so important versus a risk of what are your crown jewels, what's important to you, what is important to the mission. And by the way, many times it's not, in the government sector, it's not necessarily about the money, it's about the information. It's about your ability to conduct and continue a mission and not have an interruption caused by a cyber attack might be actually the more relevant things. And so today we're going to talk about how do we take a new approach where we move more from an attack surface management approach and cyber risk exposure and all these terms that the industry has come up with, CASM and CAASM and CPAP and all of no, that's actually a different thing. But you have as many acronyms over there, so we're going to introduce a new one. So quickly to say, well, what is cybersecurity? I know we put a lot of effort into that. At the end of the day, cybersecurity is really a risk management exercise. And so the idea is not to essentially fix anything and everything that is causing, is just to manage the risk in a meaningful way. And so for that, the question is, how do you define risk? Now, obviously, NIST has its own definition of risk, I think, which is, when you distill it down, makes sense. But it's very simple, right? Which is you take the impact and the likelihood. And so a lot of times when we look at our, what Rachel talked about, well, what could happen if they come in, or a particular CVE, how bad could things get if that was exploited? That's your impact. But given the volume of things we're finding, the likelihood is now becoming more and more important because you just don't have the resources to be able to address anything and everything. How do you create an approach where you're constantly up to date on monitoring what is becoming impactful, what is causing an impact, and how the likelihood of that is increasing? And that's what we're going to talk about when you look at risk. Now, the good news is that overall, throughout many agencies, it is really a core federal practice to take a risk-based approach, but we just don't have a great way of looking at it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So when you say risk management, what does that mean? And I think there's a really good definition of this in this book, which is How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. And it is by Richard Seierson. And he talks about, it's the concept of managing or mitigating or transferring the most plausible, which is the probability of an impact to the mission. So either you mitigate it, you transfer the risk to someone else, or how much of it will you accept? Because at the end of the day, there is nothing like zero risk. So you're never going to have a zero risk, which means you're going to have to figure out, given the resources that I have, how can I come up with something that allows me to address the most plausible risk factors and then make sure that those are fixed. And for most agencies, it is really about aligning that risk to what is the potential disruption to the mission, to the program that currently is important. And obviously in the commercial sector, a lot of that is directly tied to dollars. It's about how much money am I going to lose if this particular compromise happens. And it's never the same. Like, you always have certain missions, certain programs that are significantly more important than others. And how do you make sure that you don't take a blind approach to saying just because a vulnerability or a misconfiguration is exploitable, which is the attack surface, you actually may not have that much of a risk. And of course, that the mission objectives define sort of what is very important for your agency, and then how do you provide this sort of a reporting and visibility to to the management, really, at the end of the day, is to say, well, what is currently the risk to a particular mission or objective, and how are we doing against it in terms of a possible attack that could happen. Now, to understand the risk, you have to speak the same language. But today, we speak different language, which is you talk about the number of vulnerabilities, you talk about number of misconfiguration, number of patches. And I don't know if you ever tried to explain this to, the leadership within the agency. It means nothing to them. If you go and tell somebody, oh, we fixed 9 million vulnerabilities, it's like, okay, so what does that mean? Like, is the mission now 10 times safer than it was? Is it like 2 times safer? Is it worse? I don't know, right? Because you fix so many vulnerabilities, do we cause issues that now the systems are not going to work because they've introduced so much risk? So the language that we speak is like, oh, how many vulnerabilities, how many patches, how many CVEs, but that doesn't really mean anything from a mission perspective, right? And so when you ask anybody today, what is the state of cybersecurity risk management in any agency, people will say, I have a dashboard for that. Oh, there's a different dashboard for your code repository scanning. There's a different dashboard for your cloud security. There's a different dashboard for identity security. There's a different dashboard for the vulnerabilities. There's a different dashboard for every single thing. So you have this, SPM scroll. You have posture management for identity. So you have ISPM, you have DSPM, you have CSPM. So we just continue to add more and more. And so while those dashboards look very nice to take selfies with, it doesn't actually give you any clarity on what does that mean and aligning it to what the outcome and what your, the job of that particular agency is. And so the question really becomes is how do we pivot that and how do we change that and how do we start speaking the language of risk? Now, before we even get there, however, to be able to do that, do we even know how many assets we have in our environment? How many of you are pretty sure that you know all the assets that you have in your environment? Okay, there's one person that knows. Rest of us, we struggle with even knowing what the assets are. If we don't know the assets, how can we even put together any form of program or risk management, right? Like you buy a insurance for a house. Like you can't even describe your house. You don't even know how many windows you have. You can't explain, what the roof is made of. You're not going to get insurance because you need to know what is it that you're trying to protect here. That's it. Or we're just trying to protect some stuff. What are the risk factors, right? The industry tends to over-rotate on vulnerabilities. And so, by the way, you could have an asset that is perfectly patched with 0 vulnerabilities, but it could have a misconfiguration that would allow somebody to even more easily get in and compromise the machine because, by the way, the C drive is open read-write to the entire network accidentally. Okay, no CVE, but you have that. You might have, sometimes you don't even need to go through all of that effort. If you could just compromise somebody's password, then you just go log into the UI and steal everything. Why do you have to go through multiple hops and reconnaissance and stuff like that? So what are all the risk factors? Can we bring the different things that we're seeing through different tools together so that we can correlate them effectively and then apply threat intelligence? Because that is what defines the likelihood. So if there is something that is actively being exploited, if we see that something is being trending, talked about in the dark web, we're seeing that being used as part of a malware or ransomware attack, that significantly increases the likelihood of a compromise happening through that. So many times when you talk about risk factors, applying the layer of threat intelligence is the most significant step that you can take. Now, we could, like I said, we could build all these nice visibility dashboards and take selfies with them, but it doesn't matter if at the end of the day you don't fix the issue before the attacker gets there. Right? Nobody's going to be like, wow, you did such a great job to build this dashboard, but you still got compromised. And so that is another area where we see friction between the people who are managing and maintaining systems and need to fix things versus those who are assessing the risk. And that definitely the language there is not common language because you are giving them 10,000 CVEs to fix and they complain, but they have to do it. And then when they do it, you thank them by giving them 10,000 more CVEs to fix, right? So they are not looking forward to conversations with you. The conversations are not anchored on, hey, by the way, we have a high elevated risk of a potential compromise happening. And you can be the hero that brings that risk down by just fixing 4 things. By fixing these 4 things, you can actually bring the risk factor down significantly. That conversation would go down a lot better than here's 10,000, thank you, here's 10,000 more. So remediation becomes super important. We have to make sure that whatever program we put in place, the remediation part has to happen. So, getting rid of a risk has multiple steps here. It's not just that, okay, you basically see a vulnerability and you click on it. But what happens today is that because we're just saying, oh, this is critical, that is critical, that is critical, you kind of create this fatigue where people are like, okay, I don't know, this person always comes and says everything is critical. So you tend to not have, give any cadence to that. So the problem then becomes is that at some point, if you constantly keep saying everything is critical, then, you're like, nothing is critical, right? And when you have so many different security finding types that are causing risk, right? Vulnerabilities can cause risk, identities can cause risk, misconfigurations can cause risk. Actually, a lot of times the correlation between them is what is causing the elevated risk, right? Just because you have a vulnerability may not mean anything, but a combination of a misconfiguration of vulnerability and identity can cause that. Now, a vulnerability, is not just what it used to be, where you have a Qualys or a Tenable scan, on a running system, and that's it. It is really about now you have a different cloud solution, you have a different solution for your container scanning, you have a different solution for applications, your SQL ingestion, cross-site scripting. You now have AI is coming up. So there are AI scanners that are providing you findings in your AI related issues. So, and they all want to do a great job of discovering absolutely anything and everything that they can. But that also means that you are left with not one pile, but like 10 different piles of things that you don't know what to prioritize first, and which one should be the one that actually is going to create the maximum impact from the reduction of the likelihood of a compromise happening for a particular mission. Now, interestingly, you will have millions and millions of findings, but threat intelligence, and if you look at the analysis which Qualys has been doing for many, many years, you can see that the number of CVEs keeps increasing, but less than 5% of those CVEs on any given day actually have a potential of a compromise. That's your efficiency aspect now, to say what of all the things that are being shown to me actually are causing a risk that I should address. Now, the challenge is that this changes every day, right? Something that was not exploitable maybe 2 years ago suddenly becomes exploitable, and now you have to stay on top of that. So the efficiency is going to come from figuring out all the risk factors, but then applying the context of the mission, context, and the context of the threat intelligence to really narrow down to, so the question is which 5% on any given day should be the ones that your team should be focusing on. And that's where the paradigm shift needs to happen from not every security finding needs to be fixed. How do you move a security finding just because you have an open port, just because you have an open vulnerability? How do you move that from a security finding to an indicator of risk? We're all used to the concept of indicator of compromise, but that is after a compromise has happened. How do you look at a proactive way to say, yes, I have all of this stuff, but very few things actually indicate that there is a risk here. Just because you have a security finding doesn't mean that there is risk. And when we don't have that operationalized, what happens is that there is a risk whack-a-mole. Everybody is like, oh, somebody called and this thing is in the news. This is on X now, Twitter, Truth Social, new CVE. Everybody runs after that. I don't know how many of you have PTSD from Log4j, where we just fixed stuff for no reason because we didn't want to upset people in higher positions, because they were like, is the count zero? Is the count zero? And any conversation that would be like, well, we don't need to fix this because there is no plausible attack path to that, didn't go. So now what happened is like we put all our resources running behind one particular thing, and that's the risk whack-a-mole that we have. The next big thing that comes up, we'll all be running there. So it's just like not a very operational. It's like the kid with the shiny, playing with the toy, and you see another shiny toy, and then you have to run behind that new shiny thing. And that's not a operationalized model. And so that's really where Qualys has been thinking last couple of years. What do we need to do to help the industry, to help agencies think through on a new approach, right? This is not a Qualys product necessarily, but we draw inspiration from how did we get to the concept of SOCs, right? We all have SOC. Today, you cannot be an agency that says, yeah, we don't have a SOC. Now, the SOC is important to detect something after a breach has happened. But what is the concept there? You are taking log data from many, many, many different sources, gigabytes and terabytes of log data, and you're correlating that, you're adding threat intelligence, and then you're figuring out that needle in a haystack to say, these three things indicate that there is an indicator of compromise, that an attacker is in my environment, and then you orchestrate using SOAR some form of remediation action. However, that's somebody already in the environment. For proactive risk management, what is it that you're doing? I asked this to many CISOs, to many government leaders, and when I ask this question, they start to say, well, we kind of have a security data lake, and then there is a Jira integration, and they're just not able to really explain what is the process people really operationalized thing that you have that is actually helping you say, I have a process in place that is kind of foolproof, right? When you have a SOC, you just tell people, yes, we have a SOC, and the people are like, okay, you know what you're doing. Risk management is not so much. That's why last year we started talking about the concept of operationalizing your exercise so that you can actually create a ROC, which is the concept of a risk operations center. And the idea is that instead of playing risk whack-a-mole and running after the next big thing, how can we really streamline the entire process of a risk operations center? And so we define at a high level what is a risk operations center and what are the components of a risk operations center. Again, a risk operations center is a concept. It is not a Qualys product or anything. It is a concept of what are the different building blocks if you are going to build out a risk operations center, which has, of course, a systems component, a people component, a process component. But at a high level, every risk operations center needs to start with a unified view of all of your asset inventory in one place. Your CMDBs, that's one constant, is your CMDB is always broken. Your IT teams will be hating on your scanning tool all month long, but at the end of the month, they'll come and say, hey, can you give me that output of your scanner? Because it knows assets that I don't know about so that I can update my CMDB. It's the other way around. They should be telling us what assets should be scanned. Instead, at the end of the month, they want to know what assets are in there that they don't even know about. So you have to have a unified asset inventory where you can bring all the tools together. You have to be able to bring all of the risk factors proactively. It doesn't matter that maybe you're using a cloud scanning capability from the cloud provider, native capability, but then you're using a different identity provider, security provider, you're using a different vulnerability scanner for the workload. You have to have an operationalized threat intelligence. Like I said, threat intel changes every day. Something that was not being used by attackers may now be used in the last 24 hours. Just because you have something that's exploitable may not actually mean anything to your agency if you don't have the mission context. And we talk about this all the time, especially in the commercial side when we talk about it. I always ask people, okay, you have two business units. One of them has a risk score of 900 on 1,000. Another one has a risk score of 700 on 1,000. Which one will you prioritize first? People always say the 900. But then if I tell you that the 900 score on 1,000 is for a business unit that makes 2 million a year, and the 700 is on the one that makes you 500 million a year, immediately the prioritization changes. So prioritization just on threat intelligence is not good enough. It has to be very clear what that means to you and your ability to continue your program, to continue your mission. And like I said, sometimes it's not about the money, it's about the information, or it's just the ability to have continuity and continue to make sure that your systems are not taken down, because that can have a pretty big devastating impact. And that's kind of how you get to the prioritization stage. After that, you need to be able to orchestrate a response. Like I said, if you're not actually fixing anything, it means nothing, right? You could create all these dashboards, but you have to get to the point where you can show that you are able to orchestrate the right response, communicate the right language to the people, and make sure that there is an outcome, because communication is one of the most important things in cybersecurity that people really, it's understated. It's if you can communicate the right way to the IT team, they will fix those things. Communicating this to the leadership is very important, because that makes a difference between them thinking you're not doing anything, or why are there still so many open issues, because you're not able to communicate properly how you reduce the risk while reducing the amount of money you're spending in fixing those things. And then you have to have compliance reporting, right? Like no matter what, we all get audited all the time. It's the least fun part of the job. And what is interesting about audit is that If your agency is like really targeted by the Russians, the North Koreans, in a very sophisticated targeted attack, that's hard to, you could be like, well, that had the resources that we did. But you fail an audit, like that's something that is fully within your control. Like your team should have been able to fix the values to what they should be so that you'll pass the audit. So any failing an audit in many cases actually causes risk factors to increase. So a risk operations center, really, whether you use any set of tools, products, I think in today's environment, this approach is really what we need to focus on over the next few years, is to really operationalize our risk management exercise, because that is where you get the efficiencies, where you can reduce a significant number of findings to something that is very important to you and really focus on fixing those. And it is also a very strategic conversation with your leadership. If your leadership asks what's your 2025 cybersecurity strategy, and you say this is the year we are going to implement CyberArk encryption on all the hard disks, that still doesn't mean anything to them. But if you're able to explain that this year we are actually going to elevate our program, we're going to implement a risk operations center, we're going to bring all the assets and risk factors together so we can eliminate the things that we are fixing today that don't need to be focused on. This way we are bringing more efficiency. We're actually able to give time back to the agency IT teams to innovate the next big thing, leverage AI, whatever it is. That is a much more strategic conversation around a rock, rather than just saying that, okay, this year is the year of the RBVM or CTTM or whatever the next thing is. That's where, of course, Qualys, we have our view, and we were pretty excited to launch our version of the Risk Operations Center, which we call as Enterprise Risk Management, is enterprise-grade risk management solution. And this is a great example of the value and of efficiency that a risk operations center can bring. This is a real POC data that we did 2 weeks ago with a large pharmacy company in the United States. We were able to leverage in the risk operations center. We brought all their assets from all of their different tools. We were able to bring all of the findings from all their different tools, security tools, and that was about 62.5 million findings that we ingested in about 24 hours in one place, correlated all of them, deduplicate the assets, etc. Once we applied the threat intelligence, that actually came down to only 4% that actually had exposure, that were indicators of risk, because a lot of the others did not have an actual way to exploit them, as an example, or were not actually actively being used by attackers, etc. Then once we apply the prioritization based on business unit, mission, which of these actually are a part of important programs, important missions. When we did that, then it came down to about 304,000 findings, which is less than 1%. And I asked the CISO, look, if you say that it's going to cost you $1 to patch every vulnerability, we just saved you from $62.5 million to $300,000. So I'm happy to take $5 million. He said no, but I was just saying, And by the way, if you go to the Doge site, that's how they talk in dollars. They talk in dollar savings. Nobody cares. I went to the whole site. I did not find any vulnerabilities. And by that, I mean I did not find any vulnerability counts listed there that said that, hey, look at this agency. They had so many vulnerabilities. They're talking dollar terms, right? So the cost saving is real. And then how do you take that further into, well, our job is not necessarily to patch. Our job is to eliminate the risk of that particular finding. And patch is just one approach. And so recently when we launched the capability which we call as Eliminate, where you can apply mitigations, we provide you a way to apply a very small change to the machine that because of that now the attacker cannot exploit the vulnerability anymore. You don't need to patch. Just change the cipher, sometimes disable a service, sometimes just change the permission on that file and it's not executable anymore. So you don't have to apply a patch right away. So there are many ways that you can leverage to mitigate and eliminate the risk of the particular vulnerability. So as part of a risk operations center, you can truly, once it's operationalized, it's all in one place and it's all orchestrated, become significantly more efficient to be able to do that. And for that, our first focus was how do we provide efficiency in bringing and correlating multiple sources of threat intelligence into one single risk operation center. Whenever you guys go out, build a risk operation center, your threat intelligence is going to be one of the most important pieces. And if you are trying to buy different feeds and correlate that yourself, that in itself causes a certain inefficiency. So getting a risk operations center where a lot of this threat intelligence gathering and analysis and correlation is already done is going to save a lot of effort for you to have to try to do this yourself. And then I wanted to give a couple examples where we have this particular CVE, which is ranked as CVS's base score 6.0. And however, when we applied our threat intelligence from Qualys, we saw that it's trending in the dark web in the last couple of weeks. We found out that there is a POC kit or there is a weaponization for that particular vulnerability, that it is also remotely exploitable, not just by local. We found out that there were unattributed threat actors that were using that particular thing, and then just because you have a vulnerability and that it could be exploitable, well, what if the service is not even running? What if it's not on the kernel that is currently running? It's a theoretical vulnerability. You don't actually have a way to compromise. So when we applied the Qualys vulnerability scanning system, that came out to be a 9.5. Now you would have normally said, okay, CVS's base is low, I don't need to prioritize fixing that. But when you apply these threat intelligence pieces, you suddenly realize, wow, CVSS says 6.0, QVSS says 9.5. On the flip side, here's a CVE that is currently a 9.8. Now, however, there is no dark web chatter that we see in the last 6 months. There is no POC, or forget an actual weaponization, there's not even a POC kit. There is currently, you need to be actually on the machine as an example to exploit it. There are no known threat actors, and even the app is not even running. The app that has the vulnerability is not even running on the system. So we deprioritize that down with QVSS to 6.3. Now, if you were not leveraging a risk operations center, your teams would be fixing this first and spending all their time fixing this, versus fixing the other one that actually causes risk, versus this one that does not cause you risk, but looks good on the report that you send to the leadership. And then you still get compromised after that because we're like, oh wait, we didn't take a different approach. So this is why I wanted to give this example to say threat context is super important. I think there are additional ways now with the use of AI. As you said, I've avoided that word until all these first 20 slides, because we really don't like to over-rotate like many other companies that say like AI is going to solve everything, world hunger and all that stuff. The reality is that it is a great tool in the context of a platform, is going to be very helpful. And while Gen AI was fun in the beginning, nobody has the time to just sit there all day and keep asking questions. And that's where agentic AI is actually here to make a truly meaningful impact, where you can build agents in a risk operations center where they can proactively go and triage your risk. And so that's one of the things that we have added to our risk operations center concept, which is, can you create agents? Can you have a Patch Tuesday agent? That agentic AI agent leverages intelligence, leverages automation, leverages LLMs to then focus on how do I, whenever a Patch Tuesday comes out in an autonomous way, how do I go and make an impact by not having to have so many people involved in the process? Can it learn the way you triage your findings based on your mission priorities and say, looks like the last 5 times you prioritize this high, which means to you this is important, and we're going to start learning and building that. Could you have an agent that is basically ransomware exposure reducer, very focused on ransomware? They don't do other things, they just focus on ransomware. Now, and I think this is going to be a reality where a workforce is going to be a combination of people and agents working together. And I'm sure agents are going to also get to the point where you're going to have some HR conversations with them, and you have to give them training and how to behave with each other. That'll be the fun aspect of where we go. But an agent can really tell you, hey, this is what I did. This is how I got to where I got to. This is how I went from 62 million findings to 300,000 findings. So I'm not going to get deep into that, but I'm putting it out there that when you build out a formalized risk operations center, you can add these multiple components that help you reduce that risk. After that, executive reporting is very important because at the end of the day, your executives don't want to know how many CVEs and things like that. But can you rank your missions based on priority, which are sort of the blue boxes saying, look, for an agency, this is the most important program for us, and this is the most important mission. And then rank your risk score, which is just essentially a probability. What it tells the leadership is that you're investing the money in the right way because you have reduced the risk. The risk is the lowest of a compromise on the highest value mission, the highest value program, and it is the highest on the lowest importance, which means you are prioritizing correctly. And that is something that you can have a conversation to say, look, we have a risk appetite. If you see there is a risk appetite, every risk operations center should have a risk appetite because you don't want to fix everything. And then what is the gap between where you are to your risk appetite, and what are the 5 things that need to be fixed to get to that point? That's the kind of reporting a risk operations center should generate. It is not about it's not about the vulnerabilities and misconfiguration counts. And then, of course, there's the end of the day, nothing works better than a wall of shame report, which you all know. So we have made sure that that is something that a risk operations center always generates, is a wall of shame report. And of course, you can look outside all the different things that we do, but the risk operations center, once you implement that, is going to give you a lot of interesting ways to actually explain. Explainability is very important. Why we have decided to not fix something, why we decided to fix something. So you can get that level of visibility from the risk operations center, the Qualys ETM capability as well. And then when you are giving ways to prioritize, you can get some different suggestions that the AI tools are generating to say, if you want high risk reduction, you want a score to go from 700 to 300, you're taking a higher operational risk, but you are also reducing your security risk significantly. And maybe you want a balanced approach. And the AI agents can learn how you triage and tell you. So that has to be part of your risk operations center in how you get there. And so sometimes going from 700 risk score to 300 just means you have to fix 39 things. It's not 700,000 things. So if you can focus and you can go to your IT team and say, hey, you can be the hero who reduced the score by half just by fixing 39 things, they're going to love that conversation more. And like I said, of course, being able to be audit ready is super important, and that's something part of the risk operations center outcome. And so for that, of course, as Qualys, we have really opened up our platform where it's not just about Qualys sensor. We're able to take data from other tools, whether it's Qualys, CrowdStrike, Wiz, Tenable. We're taking data. We have multiple threat intelligence capabilities, etc. So when you step out, the team will be happy to give you that. Of course, we have been doing this since 2026. We have been moderate. We have the highest number of ATOs of any cyber provider for a moderate. We are this close, hopefully, to our FedRAMP high, which we have really invested in because your data is, and the security of your information is highest priority for us. So Qualys has really significantly invested, and we're pretty close to that. We're hoping that this should happen in the next couple of months as well. And then it's about an ecosystem. Now, no vendor should come and tell you that they are the single pane of glass. If you buy all of their modules, that you're going to get, everything is going to be beautiful. It's not. You need an ecosystem play where a risk operations center can allow your teams to use the best tool, empower them to use the best tool they think is the right tool for that job, and however, still be able to pull that data and give you a higher level single view, not going and having to replace every tool that you have from that perspective. We also introduced the concept of a MROC, like people are used to MDR. You can have a managed risk operations center. Today, working with the DHS, the CDMF program as an example is where these smaller agencies get a service provided. You can have something like that where as an agency, you're able to provide risk management services to multiple entities within your portfolio. And this managed risk operations center, definitely partners, system integrators are leveraging this to say sometimes agency doesn't have the resources, they can manage the risk operations center by making sure that they can quantify the risk, pull in all their tool data, monitor proactively when something new comes up, and then provide remediation services on top of that as well. On the private sector, we of course also partner with a cyber insurance company. So we have a cyber insurance company that actually is, if the customer is sharing their risk score from the Risk Operations Center to the cyber operations company, they actually got approval from the insurance regulator in the United States to give a 15% discount on the cyber premium, which is a pretty meaningful way to show that, look, if I'm taking the effort and I'm streamlining my risk management process, I should get a benefit out of that. And then these are some of the initial partners, and we're adding more, etc. I am definitely over time, as I always am, because I like to talk a lot. So I'm going to leave this as the last slide. I hope that this was helpful for you to think about a new approach, moving from attack surface management to risk surface management. To go there, we need to build a risk operations center, and we need to really be able to get to the point where we can actually do more in cybersecurity by spending less overall. And by spending, I mean the number of people and effort that we're putting in without the right visibility can actually be streamlined. And I think that is the future for where the industry needs to go, whether you use a Qualys capability or not. I think the conversation on Risk Operations Center are the conversation that should be happening to build something that helps us streamline and manage our risk. With that, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys coming out.